Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. At the edge of possibility, we fuse science, spirit, and adventure alongside healers, scientists, pioneers, and mystics to turn potential into practice, create real results. Subscribe and join me on the adventure. Lynne McTaggart, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here with you, Derek. Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to meet you. And I came across your work pretty early in my own metaphysical quest, and I've been doing the same bridging science and spirituality endeavors, not quite as long as you have. I come from a science background. And then when I was traveling the world, going to these sacred sites, I started to encounter, holy people and gurus and grandmothers and ancient traditions, and started getting activated, so to speak, for all of this. Because I'm from St. Louis, one of the first things I read in your work was through your intention experiments, and you were working on reducing violence. And it happened to be a neighborhood here in St. Louis, which I know I've ridden my bike through ill-advisedly through that neighborhood. It was actually fine. The funny thing is, the most violent neighborhoods have some of the friendliest people, a lot more cheers and encouragement from the people at the bus stop or whatnot than through the more affluent neighborhoods. I was wondering, maybe you could give a quick recap of the St. Louis experiment and those experiments more broadly.
Sure. And for anyone who doesn't know what I do, I test intention and I also work with intention. And since 2007, I've been running something called the Intention Experiment, which I started because there was a bit of leftover business about intention. I mean, intention was in the popular literature, it was in the movie The Secret. Everybody was talking about manifesting. I'm a hard nosed journalist by background, an investigative reporter. I started out my career with hidden tape recorders to put bad guys into jail. I wanted to find out, how far can we take intention? Can we lower violence with our thoughts? Can we cure cancer with our thoughts? And what happens when lots of people are coming together at the same time? Does it magnify the effect? I started testing it. We've run 42 experiments to date, everything from trying to make seeds grow faster to purifying water to lowering violence in violent neighborhoods or war-torn areas to healing somewhat of post-traumatic stress disorder. Of those 42, 38 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. One of the most exciting ones was lowering violence in the officially most violent city in America, which is St. Louis, Missouri. It was at the time we were doing it, which was 2017. And we wanted to pick the most violent neighborhood in all of St. Louis, which was the fairground area. And we did an intention to lower violence there, and we ran it for 10 minutes a day over 6 days. And then we sat back patiently to wait. You always have to wait a while after doing an intention to lower violence to see what happens. I worked with Dr. Jessica Oates, who is at the University of California at Irvine, and she took 3 years of violent crime data from the St. Louis police for St. Louis as a whole, Fairground as a whole, and then the neighborhoods around Fairground. And we waited 6 months afterward. We had 3 months before and then 6 months after our experiment to compare. And we found that violent crime, which had been going up everywhere, including in Fairground, continued to go up in St. Louis as a whole and the areas around Fairground. So did property crime. But afterward, in Fairground, property crime continued to go up, but violent crime, the focus of our intention, went down by 43%. That was a compelling experiment.
Do you have a sense of how long those effects lasted?
We only measured it for that time, but it had gone down and continued to go down for the 6 months afterward, and that was compelling. No, we've never measured something to see what's happened 5 years later. It'd be
Mhm.
interesting to see.
I have a thought of an experiment that I wanted to run by you, but first I was curious about what do you think is happening on the ground in the neighborhoods? The people that would be committing violent acts, what do you think is happening that leads them to not be doing that?
That's the $64,000 question. How are we affecting people with our thoughts? I can't tell you because I try to follow the science and I can only tell you what the outcomes are. But we have a lot of ideas about why it works collectively like that. And we've done it over again so many times. The most recent one we did was February 1st of this year. I ran a big intention experiment at the Gaia Sphere in outside of Boulder, Colorado, with Gaia. And we had an audience of 300, but we had thousands of people who were taking part in live streaming. And I focused on three of the most violent neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. And I chose them because, number one, they were among the more violent areas of the US. And number two, they lay across the river from the Capitol building. And our experiment was only a week or two after Donald Trump got inaugurated. And remembering the last inauguration, I thought it'd be a good idea to send some peace that way. We did, and we've been calculating the results because you have to wait some months. And those three neighborhoods are the about the only ones where violent crime went down immediately after our experiment. There's a big dip in the graphs of all those three neighborhoods, which wasn't the case in other neighborhoods around Washington, D.C., or Washington as a whole. And it's very compelling. We get other outcomes too that are interesting with the intention experiment and peace experiments. One of those was Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had been going through a 25-year war. So I thought that's a good target because it's a completely intractable war. Nobody's getting anywhere, the government or the rebels. And we can get data from there because it's hard to do anything and study anything scientifically in a war zone because no governments like to talk about the bodies. They don't want to reveal the bodies, and it's very difficult to make sure that you're getting accurate information. So we chose Sri Lanka because there was an organization on the ground that was keeping track of deaths and injuries. We did it, and we ran it for 8 consecutive days, 10 minutes a day, with my audience around the world. And I was alarmed because violence quadrupled during that week.
Oh,
But then it plummeted. But more interesting was what happened longer term. Listen to this because you asked about longer term. It turned out that the 8 days of our experiment were one of the most significant times of the entire 25-year war. The government won decisive battles during that week that turned around the entire course of the war. So that the rebels had choked off the entire north of the country and were holding it. And the government, because of those decisive battles, was able to reclaim the North within a few months. And a few months after that, that 25-year war was over. Now, it ended in a bloody finish, but it ended. Now, did we do this? Short answer with any of these experiments. Who knows? But when you keep doing it and you keep getting extraordinary results, it starts getting compelling.
that was almost the in order to achieve those intentions, the you had to have certain violent interactions that would then lead to the resolution that was intended.
That would seem to be the case. That would seem to be the case. But certainly when we started the intention, there was no end in sight.
It almost mirrors what I perceive happening in the world with a lot of chaos and destabilization and things that I see things heading in the direction of you've heard about New Earth or the ascension process or all of these things. And it seems old systems would have to dissolve or eventually disappear in one way or another in order for better systems and structures to take their place. You have to go through the disruptive, violent process of that. Do you, as a scientist and a researcher, what's your concept of, let's call it the move to New Earth, if we could term it that?
Sure. First of all, to clarify, I'm not a scientist. I'm a science writer. I've carried out so
I
many.
think that you've earned the term scientist.
Probably so. Many people like Irvin Laszlo keeps nudging me and saying, "You got to get your PhD." And I say, he says, "Turn the field into a PhD thesis." And I said, "I don't have time. I'm doing too many things out there in the field." Yeah, you're asking, do we have to break down before we break through? Absolutely. What we're seeing is the breakdown of all of these systems that we have lived by. And I believe it has to do with a, a wrong-headed story, maybe a story that served us for many years, but that no longer serves. Science writes the story we live by. The story we're telling ourselves still is extremely out of date. Our definition of ourselves and the way the world works is primarily a definition created by Isaac Newton more than 300 years ago, who described a very well behaved universe of separate things. And this idea got bolstered by the ideas of Charles Darwin, who essentially he himself was very influenced by ideas about population explosion. And so he came to the realization that there wasn't enough to go around. Life must proceed through struggle. At the end of his life, later in his life, he realized that cooperation was a key element in the human and animal experience. But his idea, as promoted by many of his friends, um, was this whole meme of survival of the fittest. And that became a justifying principle for a lot of ideas of the time, including Nazism a bit later, colonialism, the idea that certain races were better than others, and much more. And even Darwin was in favor of euthanasia at that time. That added up to was essentially a leitmotif of competitive individualism, which is what we have created with all of our societal structures. And clearly that is not working anymore. It's behind climate issues, where humans are contributing to it. It's behind what's breaking down about capitalism. We're creating a capitalism that has it as it in its heart unfairness. And as soon as a society has things that are not fair, the society breaks down. That's a key piece of the human experience. We have to belong, we have to connect, and we have to have things that are fair, or society breaks down. And that's what's going on. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, that's for sure.
Given that a lot of science is based on these much older belief structures, what is the role of science as you see it?
The role of science is to become much more open minded and to go back to basics, which is every scientist should be an explorer. And if they come to a discovery that is a square peg in the round hole of established theory, they have to go with it and study it and follow it. But the problem with science is extraordinarily reactionary.
Mm.
Science is if you find something new, and I've seen this through all of my books and the many scientists I've talked with, if you are an explorer and a pioneer and you find out something new, you risk the censure of your peers, you risk losing your job, you risk ridicule. And that has been the way of all of the pioneer explorers that I've interviewed. Robert John and Brenda Dunn from Pear, from Princeton University. He lost his position as dean of engineering because he dared to do rigorous studies into the nature of consciousness, something university did not. And so that happened. Fritz Albert Popp, who discovered there's light coming out of the body, an amazing discovery, was censured by the University of Marburg and lost his position in Germany for many years. All of these great scientific um, pioneers did this at great personal cost. Science needs to become open minded and needs to be scientific. I look at the medical literature because we run a magazine and have done a publication for 35 years called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And even the British Medical Journal has admitted some years ago that three-quarters of medical science, the studies of medical science, are fraudulent, are not worth the paper they're written on. Three quarters. That's not science, that's fraud. That's an industry justifying what it's doing, and which is one of the most profitable industries on earth, the pharmaceutical industry. We need to go back to first principles.
How has your concept of the material world, this world that we're living in, evolved over the decades of your work? And what are some of the newer insights that you have about the nature of how we're experiencing reality?
Okay, great question. They've evolved from having a fairly standard view of the body as being a collection of electrical and chemical signaling to understanding far more that we are pulsating energetic systems, that we are affected by the outside. We're built essentially from outside in. The food we eat, the friends we have, the air we breathe, the sum total, the thoughts we have, the sum total of how we live our lives, that affects our biology far more than chemistry and electrical signaling. And I recognize that there are other energies that are more important in the body, light and sound. As I mentioned to you, I've finished a new book that'll be out next year called The God Notes, and it's all about how sound creates the world. I'm recognizing, and that's not woo-woo ideas, that's not Eastern ideas. That's the stuff of hard science being discovered in places like MIT and Harvard and UCLA and more. I've come to recognize that we are essentially vibrating energetic systems, trading energy out there and with other energetic systems. And until we understand ourselves as that, we're going to have the same calamitous outcomes with medicine that we have now because we're essentially trying to heal a sophisticated, extraordinary piece of equipment. And I'll call it that because it's reductive. We're trying to heal a quantum computer with a sledgehammer. That's what modern medicine is. We need to understand things in a much more subtle way. And it's completely changed my view of how the body works, how science works, and who we are and what our purpose is. And I've recognized that we have extraordinary capacities inside ourselves that haven't been acknowledged by the mainstream and have been denied to us from the time we were children by authority figures. We have the ability with our thoughts to affect our reality, to affect our bodies, to affect other people and things. Our thoughts are trespassers. We have the capacity to see beyond our senses, capacity to pick information in the future, to affect things in the past. We have many hidden abilities that haven't been practiced. And that's one of the things that I try to do. Aside from trying to prove the impossible, I try to help people live the miraculous.
Yeah, I love that. And I can imagine when you see the results of your experiments and you see miracles all the time and it becomes common occurrence, then almost anything is possible. And that reminds me, I ended up giving a talk at my kids' school, and I had taught my children to do blindfold reading, among other things. And they went on stage, they're very brave, they did blindfold reading in front of their whole school. And I was also relating some of the, experiments you've detailed in your work and others, and telling these kids magic is real, it's provable by science, let's get excited and explore it more. And every single kid was jumping out of their seats. I want to learn that. This is amazing. So I think it's beautiful to reintroduce this tangible magic back into people's lives.
I think that's absolutely the case. And I haven't just seen it with my intention experiments. I mean, I've now run tens of thousands of Power of Eight groups, and I've seen miraculous healings over and over and over again in people's lives, in their health, with people who were hopeless cases over and over again. I'll give you some examples and explain what a Power of Eight group is. Back in 2008, after I'd run intention experiments for a while and I was getting these really good results, I started thinking to myself, well, what if I shrunk this down? That we do it in a workshop, maybe with a, a small group of people. And I was kicking this around with my husband and our team. And I said, I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll put them in groups of eight and have them send intention to someone with a health challenge. And my husband is a journalist and a very good headline writer. And he said, I love it, the power of eight. And that is how the name got started.
Hmm.
But we didn't think there was going to be much power in this. We thought it was going to feel a little like somebody creeping up behind you and rubbing your back. But we put people in groups of eight, had them send intention to some member of the group with a health challenge. And we had them come in the next day for the next day of the workshop and ask them in turn, how were you? How did it go? What did it feel like? And we noticed that one of the women who had been limping badly from very bad knee arthritis was walking normally that day. She came in walking normally, and somebody else with gut problems, marked gut problems, said her gut was normal that day. And someone else who said they suffered from depression felt it had lifted. And then someone else, the most amazing, who had cataracts, said, I think they're about 80% better. I was fairly blown away by this and disturbed because I had been trying to do these serious, intention experiments, scientific stuff. I'm not a healer. I was thinking to myself, I'm not doing this stuff. This is weird. It's placebo effect. Forget it. But I kept doing it to see what was going on. And I started seeing extraordinary things going on and extraordinary miracles over again when I put people into groups. That was the key. Plenty of people having experiences individually, but the big supersizing of it happened with small groups of eight or example. Lori. So Lori was going blind. She had damage in both retina, and she went to numerous doctors, and they said, nothing we can do. And you better get used to it, essentially. She was part of a course of mine called the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass, where I teach people live and interactively on Zoom, but I also then put them into groups. And their assignment is to meet for an hour every week for a year. And Lori was meeting with her group and do intention for each other, of course. They did an intention for her. She felt a huge amount of energy around her eyes, etc. And the next thing is, and we have this all on video, she could see. Ultimately, she has 20/20 vision. She regained her sight so that it is perfect sight. And there were other cases, somebody called Lisa Pickles in the UK who was born with a liver enzyme deficiency so that her liver was deteriorating. By the time she was in her 40s, her liver was really, it was badly deteriorating, as was her spleen. And the doctor said, the only thing we can do for you is a liver transplant. And that's going to be fairly soon. She went to a place where I had taught them to do Power of Eight groups. And she was in one. And she again felt all this energy after it. And lo and behold, a few months later, she went back for one of her regular scans. And she had two consultants look at this liver specialist, and they both pronounced her liver normal. And it's continued to be normal to this day. That's two examples, but I've got armful of ones that people reversing cancer, fixing their finances, starting businesses, load of them. I've got, at least a dozen to 15 people who finally wrote the book they were planning to write for years and years, doing intention with the help of their group, or finding their life purpose, setting up an alternative medicine facility. That was somebody else. Saving their child. Little Hamilton Speckman was going to die. Doctors gave him no hope, newborn, and who had everything wrong with them. And I had my whole class intending for little Hamilton for many weeks. I've seen these amazing miracles, and they have convinced me to change the messenger. I didn't believe in any of this
Mm,
before, that we do have these hidden capacities and we simply need to learn how to use them.
amazing. I used to run for many years a mastermind group of spiritual entrepreneurs, and we took the Power of Eight protocol, but applied it to the launches or the objectives of one person each month. We would do it monthly. Somebody wanted launching a TV show or creating a new retreat or something like that, and we had 4 years of 100% success rate. And it was some very quickly in a matter of weeks. Some were much longer, 6 months or something like that. But I was after I realized, going back to calculate, wow, all of these intentions came to fruition.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we also discovered there's, in relation, not relating to healing, but in relation to trying to achieve something, there's a lot of precognitive information that happens during the session, during the circle. People would see a vision of
Hmm.
what someone was wearing on stage, or, oh, you're going to meet such and such person, and they're going to become your collaborator or business partner or something. That was interesting as well, because it gave some guidelines for people to know that they're on the right track by
Yeah.
these predictive markers.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. We do all have that capability. You can remote view your own future. You need to learn a little bit about remote viewing, but as you say, these kinds of visions can come to you or come to members of your Power of Eight group. And there's no big surprise to this, because any good quantum physicist will tell you there's no such thing as time. And there's no such place in the brain that recognizes time. The same part of the brain that, and this is under question as to whether or not it is a part of the brain, but the same part of the brain that tunes into the past also imagines the future. So we have created as humans a linear sense of time, of present, future. But time to any quantum physicist is much more one big smeared out now. And I've recognized that from the time I wrote The Field many years ago. Robert John from Princeton, I was saying to him, how can all of these amazing things be true, Bob? How can this be? And he'd say, easy, Lynn, take time out of it, and it all makes sense. And that's it, taking time out of it. So we have to understand that we can access information from the past and the future at any moment. And it's one of the things I'm teaching now is healing the past, not by changing what happened, but changing your response to what happened. And that still means going back and and taking back your power.
I had a story someone told me about. They did a bunch of healing work regarding their relationship with their family, and the effect was their physical family photo album had different photos in it. So it was oh, I imagine these events differently, or interpreted them differently, but when they went and looked, it seemed that the past physically had changed, which was the next jump to I'm healing my interpretation or having compassion towards how these events went down. Have you seen anything like that where the physical past is changing?
I have. And I want to clarify, I don't give people a different take on it. I have people essentially relive it, but say what they could have said, say what they wish they had said. In a sense, they are back there and they're dealing with it, but they're creating a new reality. I'll tell you the most dramatic one I've ever seen, which was a woman who had had a traumatic experience, and from there on in, she had vitiligo, meaning her skin had patches in it where there wasn't pigment.
Mm.
We went through my exercise, and afterward, she stood up to say, you won't believe this. My skin is repigmenting. And it was
Wow.
happening right then and there, and she showed us. That was my dramatic example and most dramatic example of the past changing right then and there. I'm not surprised if time is one big smeared out now. You can. What I don't agree, though, is for people to go back and say, I'm going to go back to that time that I was humiliated in my classroom. I was told that I was the stupidest kid in math, and I was 7 or 8 years old, and it's convinced me that I'm an idiot in math. I'm not going to go back and change the whole thing. The teacher says, you were the best. I have them change their response to the teacher, because that is the healing mechanism. It's not pretending, not creating a fairy tale. It is creating a change of response. It is changing your power. And that's the key element, because time, and this is one of the things we teach in our new course, Heal Your Past, myself and my husband, Brian Hubbard, who is the originator of the time light method, which is a whole unique method of healing trauma. And he used it to heal himself from a very abusive childhood. But his description of it is time is not linear, it's not a dimension, it's an energy. And that's why it will sit. That's why something that happened 40 years ago will sit on your shoulder like an unwanted guest. But what we do is we work together with a variety of techniques to help people dissipate that energy and change that energy. And that's the key, because you can do much happy talk, you can do it from until the end of time, or a little of this or a little of that, or cognitive behavioral stuff. And it won't necessarily dissipate that trauma, but dealing with the energy and recognizing that that energy has created you. It's not that you have a problem, it's that the problem has created you. And that is what we try
Mm.
to help people change, because the problem, that situation, that trauma, has created an energy in you that seeks to continue with it, by seeks to recreate patterns, which is why people continue to choose bad partners or the wrong job, or they procrastinate, or they explode in energy, in anger and explosive energy, and much more, because it's creating them. And we turn everything on its head.
Hmm. The pigment story reminds me of my wife is a QHHT practitioner, and she does a lot of past life work, and a lot of to be the result of injuries, even mortal injuries in other lifetimes, and that once those lifetimes are examined, the birthmark will disappear.
Interesting. We find that too. One of the things that Brian does, my husband, is deal with generational energy too, because absolutely that's exactly what you're talking about. That is interesting.
We've even epigenetic effects. If someone is healing their lineage, for example, and they have a lifetime with someone farther back in their family, their children may end up having physical reactions to the healing sessions as an epigenetic change affecting through time. It's pretty wild.
That is trippy. And this is it. It's only trippy because we have this very reductive view of what life is. When we start recognizing life is far more complex and magnificent than we've been told, and we have far greater capacities for healing than we've been told, then things open up for us.
Regarding time, how have you internalized understanding that time is a schmear of the now? How does that impact you day to day?
I try to live for the present moment as much as possible. I don't dwell on the past. Grateful for every day. And the older I get, the more grateful I am for every day. And I don't plan. I may make plans in terms of how I'm going to do in a particular day or a particular week, but I don't plan hugely for the future. I never would have anticipated the life that I have led. The only thing that was true to my plans as a young person was becoming a writer. I knew I wanted to be a writer from the age of 7, but nothing else. Certainly getting into this whole area, that was never part of the plan. As I told you, I was going to put bad guys in jail. Of coming into the writing the field and coming into this work was an amazing, extraordinary detour and a fabulous one. So, and I wouldn't have anticipated meeting my husband of 35 years next week. I wouldn't
Congrats.
have, and I wouldn't have anticipated my wonderful daughter, grown-up daughters, and our granddaughter, and all of those things weren't part of any imagining that I ever had. It's been everything. It's been such a wonderful, lucky gift. The other thing that's happened as a result of feeling much more in the now is shit happens. I trust the process. I trust that we're going to sort this out. I'll be able to deal with this. So I don't get too worried about issues. I don't get worried about, I don't dwell on tough times
Hmm.
because I feel I've lived long enough to see tough times and to see we've got through them. Somehow we managed it. That's great. That gives me trust that we'll manage it.
Beautiful. I want to circle back to the first part of our conversation regarding the intentions and measuring long term, or having intentions run long term.
Mhm.
When I had read about your St. Louis and other intention experiments, I've been doing a lot of work with crystals, quartz crystals, and Marcel Vogel has shown that they're programmable and they hold data and intention in the
Mhm.
crystals, and that data can be transferred also to water.
Mhm.
And we have a lot of water here in St. Louis as well. These two giant rivers, Mississippi and Missouri, flowing through us. And water in our main park, Forest Park, for example, has this grand basin. And my thought was, could we somehow, if we did an intention experiment where we placed the intention in crystals and then left that as a permanent grid installation and then had water somehow interacting with it, that it would be a continued mm, radiating dispersal of that intention, so that instead of doing the experiment once, that you could have it continually running. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And I've done a smaller portion of that equivalent so far, but I'm curious how that lands for you.
One thing that I think about, it's a fascinating idea. One query I have is, do you need the crystals? Because water itself is a tape recorder. Water itself polarizes around any charged particle. And this has been demonstrated by Italian research from the University of Milan, from Luc Montagnier, the late
Mm.
co-discoverer of the HIV virus, also is doing a lot of work demonstrating that water is essentially a tape recorder. And we've done about 10 intention experiments with water, demonstrating that water holds that charge, and water is affected, and it should hold it. So it's a very interesting question as to whether or not you can. Certainly, it's very interesting about crystals, and I believe that they could hold a charge of intention, but I'm wondering whether that's an intermediary step you don't necessarily
Hmm.
need. Fascinating idea to think we'll intend and keep that, and that intention will hold that charge and act as a regulator. Be interesting to see.
And partly I was thinking, if we had the installation interacting with the rivers, if it was returning, so if it was addressing violence, but if it was also addressing nature achieving its optimal harmony. A lot of these rivers are polluted, things like that. So that if the water was passing this installed grid, that it would continue to flow down the course of the river and into the Gulf and then interact with the rest of the waters of the world. That if we set a universal intention, that might be distributed by the waterways.
I would recommend you don't do that, because with our
Mm.
experiments, what we've found is you need to be a lot more specific. You can't intend for, hey, everything's going to be perfect or there's going to be peace in the world thing. I think if you focused on one or the other, it might be interesting, because if you start doing a very diffuse thing like that, you'll never know what the outcome
Mm.
is.
To measure, to be able to measure
Mhm.
or discern. That makes sense.
But fascinating idea. The whole idea of, I'm going to create this regulator. Who knows? It's an interesting thought.
What experiments have you not run yet, or collaborations that you of research you've come across that's piqued your interest?
I've focused most of my attention on lowering violence somewhere, and always wanting to prove that this can work. And of course, trying to make that as tight as possible so that we have things we can measure compared to other things we can measure, like neighborhoods in Washington, and looking at other neighborhoods sitting right next to them. And if we see major changes, it can suggest more that we're on the right track. What I'm doing at the moment is I'm working on more studies of power of eight groups. Now, we've done one study looking at brainwaves of people who were part of power of eight groups, because I wanted to find out, how come how come people heal? How come we heal blindness? How come we reverse stage 4 cancer? What's going on here? So we did a study at Life University, which is one of the largest and most prestigious chiropractic universities in the world.
Okay.
And a team of neuroscientists worked with me, and we got student volunteers, and these were total neophytes. They hadn't even meditated before in their lives. And we got 7 groups of them. We put an EEG cap on one member of each group and had them do a power of 8 session trying to heal someone of something. And we found, number one, the people they were healing, although students, they chose students with who are young people who tend to be healthy. They chose people who had some sort of pain.
Mm.
And not only did the pain lessen, but fascinating things happened with the senders. Remember, we had an EEG cap on a sender in each group. And we thought that it was going to be brainwave signatures close to those of meditation. We thought that's what we were going to see. And we were shocked to discover that they look nothing like those of meditation.
Oh.
Meditation will slow down the brain. It creates from beta waves, you probably know this, a certain brainwave speed, a preponderance of beta brainwaves. At a faster speed, it will slow down to alpha rhythms, alpha cycles per second, which are closer to light dreaming, etc., or even theta. And we had none of that. What we had was a turning off of the brain. Certain parts of the brain, like the parietal lobes, that help us navigate through space, that help us determine this is me, this is not me, they were dialed way down. Were the temporal lobes, which have a similar job, and the right frontal lobes, areas involved in worry, doubt, negativity. And these look nothing like meditation. What they did look like were almost identical to the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist then at the University of Pennsylvania, who had done similar studies on Sufi masters during chanting and Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer.
Mm.
These were brainwave signatures of people in a state of ecstatic oneness, essentially. And that I came to believe was one of the important elements as to why this is healing. Because, first of all, it's fascinating because we had total novices. These weren't experienced Buddhist monks, they weren't experienced Sufi um, chanters. They were total novices, and yet within a minute or two, they were transported into essentially a state of ecstatic oneness. I started realizing this must be one of the secret sauces here. I always have thought that altruism, the idea that you do intention for somebody
Mhm.
else 7/8 of a time in a power of 8 group, is a big piece of it too, because when you look at the science of altruism, is hugely protective. It's like a bulletproof vest. You do things for other people and you're more likely to live a longer, happier, healthier life. But the studies we want to look at now is okay, what happens to the immune system? So, as it happens, I'm in conversation with some more scientists to set up similar studies, but take blood samples, look at what's going on. The other thing that we did more recently was with that February 1st experiment is we looked at 40, more than 40 random people in our audience before and after participating in our intention experiment for peace in Washington. And we had a significant lowering of stress and a rebalancing of the nervous system. Because these days, with everything going on, everybody is sympathetic nervous system dominant. We're all
Mm.
freaked out. We're all cortisol all the time. But these these guys were regulated after our 10-minute intention. So we're going to be looking into that more. So rather than the targets, I'm more interested in the mirror effect because the most extraordinary thing that happens with people in our power of 8 groups and in our intention experiments is the senders also get healed. Typically, about 40% of those people who participate, and I survey them, so I know this, they heal or improve relationships. The relationships, if they have estranged relationships with partners or parents or children, um, they oftentimes get healed. Or they improve their relationships with their bosses or coworkers. Half of them report they feel more love for everyone they come in contact with. They're hugging strangers. And the final one is about 40% have an improvement or an outright healing of some health condition. So that's what I'm also interested in. How come that? So that's what I'm looking at now is that rebound effect. I call it a mirror effect is the most extraordinary thing of all.
Yeah, thank you for sharing yeah, how researchers and people are developing their own cutting edge. And we also did find that rebound effect when I did those several years of intention for like organizations and things like that. That is a very powerful thing to harness in a way. Is there anywhere you would like to direct or point people to should they wish to learn more about your work?
Absolutely. Please come to lynnmctaggart.com and you can find out about our two upcoming courses. The first one is Heal Your Past, which I'm running with my husband, Brian Hubbard, and we help people with all kinds of traumas heal past. We use a combination of our work. Brian is teaching therapists how to use his Timelight method, and that kicks off on October 25th. And then, and it's live and interactive. We work with people and we put them into pairs and groups where they work together and with us through paths. And we've run this for many years in retreats, which have been highly successful, and we're doing it online. So there's that. And then we'll be launching my year-long signature course, the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass. We'll be announcing that in early November. You can find out about this and everything else I do and intention experiments and our community on my site, lynnmctaggart.com.
Wonderful. And thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's been great being here with you, Derek. Thank you.